I discovered that the Maple Ridge HOA was building 96 luxury homes on my inherited farmland. But when I found my grandfather's original property surveys, their entire development suddenly became my legal property. You should have seen their shocked faces when I revealed my trap at their own community meeting. I never thought I'd have to fight for land that already belonged to me. When Grandpa Henry Carter passed away last March, I inherited his 200-acre farm outside Silverwood Valley. The land had been in our family for generations. I lived far away in the city, caught up in a demanding job that kept me from visiting as often as I should have. Then, one Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., my phone rang. It was Mrs. Caldwell, Grandpa's neighbor for 40 years. "They're building houses on your property," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "Big yellow machines started digging yesterday. You need to come quick." At first, I thought she must have been mistaken. Maybe the construction crew had crossed a boundary by accident. But Mrs. Caldwell wasn't one to exaggerate. "The Maple Ridge people put up signs all over," she insisted. "They're planning almost 100 houses right where your east fields are." I threw some clothes into a suitcase and drove straight to Silverwood Valley, breaking speed limits the whole way. 5 hours later, I turned onto the familiar dirt road leading to Grandpa's farmhouse. But this time, something felt different. The peaceful countryside was disrupted by the thunder of heavy machinery. Dust clouds rose above the trees as I crested the hill overlooking the eastern section of the property. My stomach dropped. A fleet of bulldozers and excavators clawed at the earth where Grandpa used to grow corn and soybeans. Workers in hard hats moved around like ants, marking areas with bright orange spray paint. A large sign stood near the road. "Future home of Maple Ridge Estates. 96 luxury homes starting at $450,000. I parked my car and stormed toward a woman standing apart from the workers. She wore spotless beige pants and a crisp white blouse, her hair perfectly styled despite the dusty surroundings. A clipboard rested in the crook of her arm as she spoke on the phone. "Excuse me," I said when she ended the call. "What's happening here?" She gave me a quick once-over, her expression polite but dismissive. "We're preparing for residential development." Her voice was smooth and practiced. "Victoria Langley, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association." She extended a hand, but I ignored it. "This is my land," I said firmly. "My grandfather, Henry Carter, owned this farm. He passed away recently, and I inherited it." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "There must be some misunderstanding. Maple Ridge Development purchased this parcel last year. We have all the necessary permits and approvals." "That's impossible," I shot back. "My grandfather would never have sold this land." She tilted her head slightly. "Perhaps he didn't tell you," she suggested, almost sounding sympathetic. "The sale was finalized 9 months ago. We've been planning this expansion for years." My mind raced. Grandpa had been sick in his final months, but his mind had stayed sharp. He wouldn't have sold his beloved farm without telling me. Something wasn't right. "I need to see those documents," I demanded. "You're welcome to contact our legal department." Victoria handed me a business card. "But I assure you, everything is in order. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have a schedule to maintain." She turned away, already dialing another number on her phone. I stood there, helpless, as machines continued to tear up the land that had fed my family for generations. Back at the farmhouse, Mrs. Caldwell waited on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea and a worried expression. "They started showing up with measuring tools about 3 months ago," she explained. "Your grandpa was furious. He kept saying they had no right, that they were trying to steal what wasn't theirs." "Did he mention selling any land?" I asked. "Never. Joe swore this farm would stay in your family forever." Mrs. Caldwell's eyes glistened with emotion. "The day before he went to the hospital for the last time, he was looking through his old office. Said he needed to find something important to protect the farm. Grandpa's office had remained untouched since his passing. I hadn't had the heart to go through it yet. But now, I had no choice. I spent the next several hours sifting through stacks of papers, old maps, and handwritten notes. Finally, tucked away in a weathered file, I found them, his original property surveys. My pulse pounded as I studied them. The lines, the measurements, they told a different story than the one Maple Ridge was selling. Armed with proof, I wasted no time. I contacted Samuel Hutchins, a seasoned property lawyer, and filed for an immediate injunction to halt the construction. The next community meeting was packed, with homeowners eager to hear about the new development. When I stepped forward and laid out my evidence, the room fell silent. The entire Maple Ridge development sits on my land, I announced. Legally, every home, every street, every square inch of it belongs to me. The shock on Victoria Langley's face was priceless. Now, the real battle begins. But one thing is certain, this land is mine, and I won't let anyone take it from me. Going through Grandpa Henry Carter's things during my brief visit for the funeral, I hadn't had time to search properly. Now, I needed answers. The small office smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. Shelves lined the walls, packed with farming almanacs, family photo albums, and decades of careful records. Grandpa tracked everything: rainfall amounts, crop yields, equipment repairs, all written in his neat handwriting. But where would he have kept property records? The filing cabinet seemed like the obvious place to start. I pulled open the top drawer and found folders organized by year. Nothing about land sales or Maple Ridge HOA. Hours passed as I searched. Night fell, and my eyes grew tired from reading faded documents by lamplight. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a loose floorboard under the desk. When I pressed it with my foot, it shifted slightly. Kneeling down, I pried it open with a letter opener. Inside the hidden space was a metal box. A small key hung from a nail on the underside of the desk. My heart pounded as I unlocked the box. Inside, I found the deed to Carter Family Ranch, Grandpa's will naming me as his heir, and several yellowed property surveys. But the most shocking discovery was a letter addressed to me, written in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this," it began, "then someone's trying to take what's ours." My hands shook as I read his words. Grandpa explained that developers had been circling his land for years. They had tried to pressure him into selling, but he always refused. In his final months, someone from Maple Ridge HOA visited repeatedly. The man claimed to need a simple signature for a road easement, bringing different papers each time. "I never signed away my land," Grandpa wrote. "If they say I did, it's a lie. Look at the original survey from 1910 and compare it to what's recorded at the county now. The truth is in the boundaries." I dug deeper into the box and found the original survey. It showed property lines extending much farther than I had realized. According to this document, Grandpa's farm was nearly 280 acres, not the 200 listed in current records. Sleep was impossible that night. I spread the papers across the kitchen table, comparing the old survey with newer maps. Something strange had happened over the decades. The eastern boundary had shifted, reducing our land. It wasn't just the area under construction. According to these original documents, we own land where part of the existing Maple Ridge development already stood. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. First, I needed a lawyer. Then, I needed to understand exactly what Victoria Langley and her HOA were up to. If they thought they could steal from my family, they were about to learn a painful lesson. I folded Grandpa's letter and slipped it into my pocket. "I won't let you down," I whispered to the empty room. Little did Victoria know, she hadn't just messed with a grieving grandson. She had walked straight into a trap set by a man who had anticipated her moves, even from the grave. By 8 a.m., I was already outside the office of Samuel Hutchins, the only property lawyer in Silverwood Valley. His secretary looked surprised when I asked for an emergency appointment, but she squeezed me in before lunch. "So you believe Maple Ridge HOA is building on land that rightfully belongs to you?" Samuel asked after I explained my situation. He was older than I had expected, with thick glasses and a bow tie that seemed from another era. I spread the documents across his desk. "These are the original surveys from 1910, updated in 1978. Compare them to the current county records." Samuel studied both sets of papers, tracing boundary lines with his finger. His eyebrows rose higher with each passing minute. "This is highly unusual," he finally said. "According to these original documents, your property extends nearly half a mile further east than what's currently recorded. That would include not just the construction site, but also the existing Maple Ridge clubhouse and about 20 homes built 5 years ago." I nodded grimly. "Exactly." Samuel removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "A boundary dispute of this magnitude won't be simple. We need to determine how and when these changes occurred in the official record." He called the county assessor's office, putting the call on speaker. After navigating a maze of departments, we uncovered something shocking. In 1984, a minor adjustment to the eastern boundary had been recorded, just a footnote in the county's database. But that minor adjustment had erased nearly 80 acres from our records. I clenched my fists. This wasn't a mistake. Someone did this on purpose. Samuel nodded. And if we can prove fraud, Maple Ridge HOA is in for a fight they won't see coming. I took a deep breath. My grandfather had fought to protect this land his whole life. Now it was my turn. A 10-foot easement for utilities had been recorded, but in 1997, a much larger change appeared, reducing the property by nearly 80 acres. The documentation was sparse, just a form with a signature that barely resembled Grandpa Henry's. He would have been in the hospital that month, I said, checking the date. Triple bypass surgery. He couldn't have signed this. Samuel's expression turned grave. That would constitute fraud, but proving it after all these years won't be easy. What can we do? I asked. File for an emergency injunction to halt construction immediately, then petition the court to recognize the original boundaries based on the historic surveys. We'll need a professional surveyor to verify these old maps. As Samuel prepared the emergency filing, I realized I needed more ammunition. I drove to the county records office and requested everything they had on Maple Ridge Development Company. Hours later, hidden in a back corner of the archive room with stacks of public records, I discovered gold. Maple Ridge wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a complex web of LLCs and holding companies. The same 6 names appeared throughout. Victoria Langley, her husband Thomas Langley, County Commissioner Robert Lawson, Planning Director Alan Whitaker, and 2 others I didn't recognize. But the most interesting document was from just 3 months ago. A loan approval for $16 million to finance Maple Ridge East, with the land itself listed as collateral. My land. I took photos of everything with my phone and headed to my next stop, the offices of the Silverwood Tribune, our local newspaper. The editor, Tanya Williams, had known my grandfather. When I told her I was investigating potential fraud involving prominent local officials, her journalistic instincts perked up. I can't publish accusations without evidence, she warned. But I can look into the approval process for this development. It did seem to move unusually fast. Back at the ranch, I found Mrs. Caldwell talking to another elderly neighbor. Mr. Holloway, she said, Daniel's looking into Maple Ridge. At the mention of Victoria Langley's name, his face darkened. That woman is the reason I sold my place, he said bitterly. The HOA fined me every week for unapproved landscaping. I'd been growing those tomatoes for 20 years. Then they said my workshop violated some rule they just made up. The fines kept coming until I couldn't afford to fight anymore. How many others did this happen to? I asked. At least a dozen old-timers sold out in the last 5 years. Always for less than market value. Always to companies I later found out were connected to those Maple Ridge people. A pattern emerged. Find vulnerable landowners, harass them with fines and regulations, force them to sell cheap, develop the land, and make millions. My grandfather had been their latest target, but he'd been one step ahead. My phone rang. It was Samuel. The judge granted our emergency injunction, he said. Construction has to stop immediately until a hearing next week. But brace yourself, this is going to get ugly. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a small victory. I drove back to the construction site with the court order in hand. The workers were packing up for the day when I arrived. Victoria's sleek black SUV still sat near the site office. She stepped out as I approached, phone to her ear as usual. When she saw me, her expression hardened. Construction stops now, I said, handing her the court order. Legal boundaries are in dispute. She scanned the document, her perfect composure cracking slightly. This is ridiculous. We have every approval we need. Based on fraudulent boundaries. I have the original surveys. For the first time, uncertainty flashed in her eyes. It vanished quickly, replaced by cold determination. This little stunt will cost you, she said quietly. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I do. 6 names on dozens of business filings. $16 million in loans using stolen land as collateral. County officials fast-tracking approvals for projects they secretly invest in. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. I leaned in. You should start preparing your defense, Victoria, because I'm not backing down. I hadn't planned to reveal how much I knew, but the look on her face was worth it. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. You're making a mistake, she hissed. We can be reasonable. Perhaps you'd consider a generous offer for the remaining farmland, 7 figures, immediate payment. Not interested. Everyone has a price. Her smile returned, confident and predatory. Think about it. You don't even live here. What do you care about some old dirt? This old dirt has been in my family for 4 generations. It's not for sale. I turned to leave, feeling her eyes burning into my back. As I reached my car, she called out, "Commissioner Lawson is my husband's golf partner. Judge Evans comes to my dinner parties. You think your injunction will last? You're nobody in this town." I drove away, her words echoing in my mind. She was right about one thing. I was an outsider here now. But she'd overlooked something important. Grandpa hadn't been. He'd lived in Silverwood Valley his entire life, knew everyone, and was respected even by those who disagreed with him. And he'd left me more than just land. Back at the farmhouse, I returned to his office. If Grandpa had anticipated this fight, what else had he prepared? I searched more carefully, examining every folder, every notebook. In an album labeled Community Picnic 2018, I found dozens of photos of Grandpa with neighbors, local business owners, and families who'd known him forever. Each photo had names written on the back. These weren't just memories. They were connections, people who might stand with me against Maple Ridge HOA. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Parking violation at your property. Fine, $500. Attached was a photo of my car parked at Grandpa's ranch, my own property. This was how it started. The pattern Mr. Holloway had described, harassment by paperwork. But unlike the others, I knew their game now. And I had something they didn't expect. Grandpa's secret weapon, still hidden in his files, waiting for the right moment. As night fell over the ranch, I sat on the porch where Grandpa used to tell me stories during summer visits. The eastern fields lay quiet now, construction equipment abandoned under the court order. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, Victoria would mobilize her connections. The real fight was coming. What she didn't realize was that I'd found more than just property surveys in Grandpa's hidden box. I'd found documents that didn't just question the boundary changes. They revealed who had falsified them, when, and why. Victoria thought she was dealing with an absent grandchild fighting for sentimental land. She had no idea she was facing the ghost of my grandfather, who had documented every dirty deal and suspicious approval for years, patiently building a case while they thought he was just a stubborn old farmer. The trap was set. All I had to do was let them walk further into it. My heart pounded as I pushed open the glass doors of the Maple Ridge Community Center. Tonight was the night I'd been planning for weeks. Inside, nearly 100 people filled rows of folding chairs. They chatted excitedly about new tennis courts and fancy streets while sipping punch from small plastic cups. At the front, Victoria Langley stood tall in her bright red blazer, pointing at colorful pictures of big houses on a screen. "Just imagine the swimming pool with its waterfall feature," she said, smiling wide at the crowd. "Our homes will be worth so much more once these new neighbors move in." People clapped. A few whistled. Nobody knew what I carried in my folder would ruin their party. I took a deep breath and walked straight down the center aisle. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough to make heads turn. "I need to speak about this development." Victoria's smile dropped for a second, then returned, faker than before. "We'll take questions after the presentation." "This can't wait," I replied, stepping onto the small stage. I faced the curious crowd. "My name is Daniel Carter. My family has owned Carter Family Ranch for over 100 years. And thanks to my grandfather, I have proof that this development is being built on stolen land." Grandfather owned Carter Family Ranch for 60 years. The old property we purchased, Victoria Langley cut in quickly. "Yes, we're very grateful to finally develop that eyesore." Murmurs rippled through the room. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "This is the original land survey from 1910, I said, holding it up. "And this is the updated survey from 1978. I held up another paper. "According to these legal documents, my grandfather's land extends 80 acres farther east than what appears in current county records." I turned to face the Maple Ridge HOA board members seated in a row behind the podium and placed copies in front of each of them. "Put simply," I continued, "you're building on land that legally belongs to me, and not just the new development. According to these boundaries, 20 existing homes in your clubhouse are sitting on my property too." The room exploded with voices. People stood up, someone knocked over a chair. This is ridiculous, Victoria shouted, grabbing one of the surveys. We have permits. We've sold lots. Construction has already started. I stayed calm while she grew redder. Your permits are based on incorrect property lines. I filed papers with the court to stop all building immediately. Richard Coleman, a balding man with thick glasses who served as the HOA treasurer, studied the documents with growing panic. Victoria, he whispered loudly enough for the microphone to catch. These boundary markers match the old creek bed. They look real. She yanked the papers from his hands. This is clearly some kind of trick to get money from us. We'll fight this nonsense. You're welcome to try, I replied, pulling out one final document. But here's something you should know. According to these legal boundaries, your personal house, Victoria, sits entirely on what is legally my land. The room went completely quiet. People looked at each other, suddenly understanding what this meant. 20 families might not actually own the ground under their homes. A man in the back stood up. Are you saying we might lose our houses? Before I could answer, Victoria slammed her hand on the podium. This meeting is over. Everyone out. The board needs to discuss this privately. As people shuffled out, whispering nervously, a younger woman touched my arm. I'm Emma Brooks. I just put my life savings into a lot in the new section. What happens to me? I hadn't expected to face the human cost so directly. I'm not trying to hurt regular people, I told her honestly. This is about fixing a wrong. Don't listen to a word. Victoria hissed suddenly beside us. After everyone else left, she leaned close to my face. You have no idea who you're messing with. I built Maple Ridge from nothing. Nobody takes it from me. Her threat hung in the air between us as she stormed off, leaving me alone in the empty room. Through the windows, I could see clusters of worried homeowners in the parking lot. My phone buzzed with a text from Samuel Hutchins. How did it go? I typed back. They know now. Get ready for their next move. What I didn't tell him was how shaken I felt. I had lit the fuse, but I wasn't sure if I was prepared for the explosion that would follow. These weren't just paper houses on a map. They were people's homes and dreams. But they had built those dreams on my grandfather's stolen land. Someone would end up losing everything. And Victoria Langley wasn't going to go down without a fight. I jerked awake to the sound of engines outside my grandfather's farmhouse. Bright lights flooded through the windows. I stumbled to the porch to find 3 white SUVs with Maple Ridge security painted on their doors parked in a row, blocking my driveway. Men in uniforms stood by the vehicles. One stepped forward, handing me a thick envelope. Cease and desist notice from the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, he said flatly. You are ordered to withdraw all claims against the development or face legal action. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter claiming my documents were fake and that I was attempting to commit fraud. They demanded I pay for damages to the community's reputation and threatened financial penalties if I didn't comply. I clenched the letter in my fist, my heart pounding. This was their first counterattack. But they had underestimated me. I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Reputation. You can't be serious, I said. The man shrugged. Just delivering the message. Have a nice day. He returned to his vehicle, but none of them left. I tried to leave for breakfast in town, only to discover they had placed large concrete blocks across the end of my driveway overnight. Sorry, sir. One guard said, not looking sorry at all. This access point hasn't been approved by the development committee. It's been closed for safety reasons. I was trapped on my own property. I called the sheriff's office, but they said they couldn't help with a civil dispute and suggested I get a lawyer. My phone rang. Victoria Langley's name flashed on the screen. I hadn't given her my number. Good morning, she said sweetly when I answered. Enjoying the view? This is harassment, I said. You can't block access to my property. Actually, according to county records, the real ones, that driveway crosses Maple Ridge's common areas. We're within our rights to control access. You know those records are wrong. She laughed. Let me explain how this works. Commissioner Lawson plays golf with my husband every Sunday. The building inspector's daughter works for my real estate company. The water department supervisor lives in Maple Ridge. My stomach dropped as she continued. By tomorrow, your farmhouse will be cited for at least 15 code violations. Your water might get shut off due to maintenance issues. Local contractors won't return your calls because they know better than to cross me. That's illegal, I said. That's small-town politics, she replied. You can't win this. But I'm reasonable. Drop your claims, sign over the disputed acres, and this all goes away. I'll even throw in a nice payment for your trouble. This isn't about money. It's always about money, dear. Think it over. You have until tomorrow." She hung up. I stared at my phone, then at the security vehicle still parked outside. They weren't leaving. True to Victoria's word, by afternoon, a county inspector arrived to examine the farmhouse. He found problems with everything: the wiring, the septic system, the porch railings. He handed me a list of violations that would cost thousands to fix, all needed immediately. As he left, another truck arrived. Workers put up signs along my property line: "Future home of Maple Ridge East, luxury living coming soon." My water pressure dropped to a trickle. When I called the utility company, they claimed there was maintenance work happening and couldn't say when it would be fixed. I tried ordering pizza for dinner. The driver called, saying he couldn't find my address, even though delivery had never been a problem before. I was being cut off, step by step. That night, I sat on the porch in darkness, watching the security lights sweep across the fields where my grandfather, Henry Carter, had once grown corn. Their bulldozers sat silent in the distance, waiting to continue destroying his legacy. My phone lit up with a message from Samuel Hutchins. "They filed a countersuit claiming your documents are forged. Court date set for 3 months from now. They'll keep building in the meantime." 3 months. By then, the houses would be half finished. The damage would be done. I scrolled through my contacts, looking for anyone who might help. A name caught my eye: Janet Rivera, a reporter for the Silverwood Tribune. We'd gone to high school together. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but maybe. As I considered calling her, headlights appeared on the long driveway. A car carefully maneuvered around the concrete barriers and approached the house. I tensed, wondering what new trouble Victoria was sending my way. The car parked, and a familiar figure stepped out: Richard Coleman, the Maple Ridge HOA treasurer who had examined my documents at the meeting. "I shouldn't be here," he said nervously, glancing back at the security vehicles in the distance. "If Victoria finds out." "Why are you here?" I asked. He pulled out a flash drive from his pocket. "Because what she's doing isn't right. I've been keeping the HOA books for 7 years. There are things you should see." I invited him inside. I led Richard Coleman inside, away from watching eyes. At my kitchen table, he opened his laptop and showed me financial records, meeting minutes, and emails. "Victoria and the board have been using HOA funds like their personal bank account," he explained. "Special fees that disappear, contracts that go to family members, reserve funds invested in inside businesses." "Why show me this?" I asked. "Because I'm not the only unhappy homeowner," Richard said. "Many of us are tired of her rules and her control. When you showed up with those property documents, it was the first time I've seen her scared." He pointed to a spreadsheet. "Look at these special assessments from last year. Every homeowner paid $2,000 for road repairs. The actual work cost half that amount. The rest vanished." "That's theft," I said. Richard nodded. "And there's more. The 20 homes you said are on your land? The people living there have been complaining about drainage problems for years. Victoria keeps promising fixes, but nothing happens. Now we know why. She knew those houses might not legally belong to the HOA." As we talked, my phone buzzed with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. "We support you against Victoria. The Millers, 42, Maple Ridge Lane. She fined us $500 for planting vegetables instead of flowers. Can we help? Jackson family. Our children's playground equipment was removed without notice. We want to join your fight. The Rodriguez family." Richard smiled slightly. "I may have shared your number with a few friends." For the first time since this battle began, I felt hope. Victoria had power, connections, and money, but she had also made enemies. Many of them. "We need a plan," I said, "and I think I know where to start." As Richard left, carefully driving past the security vehicles, I watched a light rain begin to fall on the half-built houses in the distance. Victoria thought she was punishing me into submission. Instead, she had just helped me find the allies I needed to win this war. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, I would stop playing defense. My grandfather always said, "The best trap isn't one your enemy walks into. It's one they help you build without knowing it." Victoria had just handed me the final pieces I needed. Underscore. The water was shut off yesterday. This morning, the electricity followed. I stood in my grandfather's kitchen, looking at spoiled food in the warm refrigerator. Victoria Langley thought she could bully me off my own land by making life unbearable. She had another thing coming. I grabbed my notebook and headed out. If Victoria wanted war, I needed allies. The first person I visited was Mrs. Caldwell, who answered her door in a flowered housecoat. "They shut off your utilities?" she gasped. "That's illegal." "So is building on my land," I replied. "But Victoria has friends at the county office. I need to know who else might hate the HOA as much as we do." Mrs. Caldwell's eyes lit up. "Oh, honey, grab a chair. This might take a while." She gave me 15 names, families who'd been fined for the wrong color mailbox, elderly couples threatened with liens for having grandchildren visit too often, a single mom who couldn't afford the $900 fee for putting up a small fence to keep her toddlers safe. I spent the entire day knocking on doors throughout Maple Ridge. At first, people were scared to talk. But when I showed them my property documents, something changed. Hope replaced fear. Sarah Jenkins, whose garden had been forcibly removed, invited me in for lemonade. Victoria made my husband dig up our tomato plants because vegetables weren't aesthetically pleasing, she said, hands shaking with anger. We got a $500 fine. My husband works 2 jobs already. The Patel family had spent $3,000 fighting the HOA over their porch swing. The Johnsons weren't allowed to paint their front door the color they wanted. Every house looked exactly the same, beige with white trim. "It's not just the rules," Trevor Martinez explained while his wife, Maria, nodded. "It's how they enforce them." Victoria drives around taking pictures of violations. Some people get warnings, others get instant fines. There's no fairness. By sunset, I had talked to 27 families, all with similar stories, all afraid of Victoria Langley. I picked up my phone and called. "Mr. Hutchins, my attorney, can we legally form a competing homeowners association?" I asked. "On your land?" "Absolutely," he replied. "But what about the existing homes?" "That's where it gets interesting," I said. "I'm going to need the community center for a meeting tomorrow night." Mr. Hutchins laughed. "They'll never let you use it. They don't own it." "I do, according to my property lines, remember?" The next day, I printed 200 flyers. Emergency community meeting. Your home may be at risk. I included copies of the original property survey. As darkness fell, the community center filled beyond capacity. 97 families showed up. People stood against the walls when the chairs ran out. Victoria Langley arrived last, pushing through the crowd, her face twisted with rage. "This meeting is unauthorized. Everyone needs to leave immediately." Sarah Jenkins stood up. "Or what? More fines? Haven't you taken enough from us already?" The room erupted in applause. I walked to the front, holding up my hands for quiet. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," I began. "I came because my grandfather's land was stolen. But after meeting all of you, I realized I'm not the only victim." For the next hour, residents shared stories of HOA abuse. Tears flowed, voices shook with emotion. Victoria sat stiffly in the back, tapping furiously on her phone. "Here's what I propose," I said when everyone had spoken. "We form the Silverwood Valley Homeowners Coalition. Together, we negotiate new property lines that are fair to everyone. We create a new community agreement with reasonable rules and transparent finances." "You can't do that," Victoria shouted. "These homes are bound by contract to Maple Ridge's HOA." I held up the original land survey. "Contracts based on fraudulent property ownership aren't valid, Ms. Langley. But I'm not here to take anyone's home. I'm here to fix what's broken." The vote was nearly unanimous. 89 families joined the coalition on the spot. As people filed out, energized and hopeful, Richard Coleman, the HOA treasurer, approached me privately. "There's something you should know," he whispered, glancing nervously at Victoria across the room. "The HOA finances, they don't add up. Monthly dues keep increasing, but our reserves are shrinking. I've tried to look into it, but Victoria controls all the accounts." I patted his shoulder. "Would you be willing to show me the books?" He nodded. "Tomorrow morning. My office." Victoria stormed over, pointing her finger in my face. "You've made a terrible mistake. By this time tomorrow, you'll regret ever coming to Silverwood Valley." "Is that a threat, Ms. Langley?" "It's a promise. I have the county commissioner, the police chief, and the local judge on speed dial. This little rebellion ends now." What she didn't know was that I'd invited a reporter from the Silverwood Tribune to sit quietly in the back of the meeting. Every word had been recorded, every threat documented. As Victoria slammed the door behind her, my phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Hutchins. Environmental survey results came in. You won't believe what's on that land. I smiled. Victoria thought she had all the power. But Grandpa always said, the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. And tomorrow, the truth about Maple Ridge HOA would be front-page news. Underscore. I woke up to police cars surrounding my grandfather's farmhouse. Through the window, I spotted Victoria Langley standing next to a tall man in uniform. Time to face the music. You're trespassing on private property, the police chief announced as I opened the door. I smiled calmly. Actually, Chief Williams, I believe you'll find I'm the legal property owner. I handed him a folder containing the original land surveys and my grandfather's deed. These documents haven't been verified, Victoria snapped. They have, actually. A woman stepped forward from a car I hadn't noticed. Carolyn Mitchell, County Records Office. We pulled the original surveys last night, after receiving some concerning reports. Victoria's face went pale. What reports? I gestured toward the farmhouse. Perhaps we should discuss this inside. Inside, coffee was ready. 15 minutes later, my kitchen table held an unexpected gathering. The police chief, the county records clerk, Mr. Hutchins, my attorney, and Victoria Langley, whose perfect makeup couldn't hide her growing panic. The original property lines were improperly recorded in 1973, Carolyn Mitchell explained, spreading maps across the table. This entire area, including the existing Maple Ridge homes and the new construction, legally belongs to the Carter estate. The police chief whistled. That's quite a mistake. Not a mistake, Mr. Hutchins said quietly. We have evidence suggesting the boundary change was deliberate. Ridiculous. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. This is a scam to extort money from hardworking homeowners. Speaking of money, I said, sliding a folder toward the police chief. Richard Coleman provided these financial records yesterday, 3 years of Maple Ridge's HOA accounts. As the chief flipped through the pages, his expression darkened. Ms. Langley, can you explain why $427,000 in homeowner dues was transferred to Sunshine Consulting, LLC? That's our legitimate management company, she replied stiffly. Registered to your son-in-law. I added, along with 4 other companies that charge the HOA for services, landscaping, security, maintenance, legal counsel, all going to businesses owned by your family members. The chief closed the folder. Ms. Langley, we're going to need you to come down to the station. This is absurd. Do you know who I am? My husband plays golf with Judge Harrington every Sunday. As the chief let a protesting Victoria out, Carolyn turned to me. What happens now? Those people's homes. I have no intention of evicting anyone, I assured her. But the development needs to stop until we can properly survey the wetlands. By afternoon, construction had halted. Local news vans lined the street outside the farmhouse. My phone rang constantly with calls from worried homeowners. I called an emergency town hall meeting for that evening. The local high school auditorium was the only space large enough. Nearly 400 people packed the room. Existing homeowners, construction workers now without jobs, county officials, and curious locals. Fear and anger filled the air. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. My name is Daniel Carter. This was my grandfather's land. I didn't come here looking for trouble. I came to honor his legacy. Shouts interrupted me. What about our homes? We'll sue. My life savings is tied up in that house. I raised my hands. Please, I'm not here to take anything from you. In fact, I want to offer a solution that benefits everyone. The room quieted slightly. I continued. First, all existing homeowners will receive proper legal deeds to their property. No one will lose their home. Murmurs of relief spread through the crowd. Second, the new development will be redesigned to protect the wetlands that my grandfather cherished. These aren't just swamps. They're critical habitats and natural flood protection for the entire area. I clicked to the next slide, showing Grandpa's environmental studies. These wetlands are home to 3 endangered species. Building on them isn't just wrong, it's illegal under federal law. A man stood up. I put my life savings into a lot in the new section. What happens to my investment? Fair question, I said. We're establishing a property exchange program. Anyone who purchased in the protected area can swap for an equivalent lot in the redesigned development. No one loses their investment. For the next hour, I outlined my vision, a community that balanced homes with nature, with transparent governance, reasonable rules, and fair fees that actually went toward community improvements. Toward the end, Sarah Jenkins took the microphone. I've lived under Victoria's rules for 8 years. I couldn't paint my door blue. I couldn't grow tomatoes. My kids couldn't play outside after 7 p.m. because it violated the noise ordinance. She looked around the room. Is that really the community we want? By the time the meeting ended, we had over 300 signatures supporting the new Silverwood Valley Community Association. Even some of Victoria's former allies joined, including Richard Coleman, who agreed to help untangle the financial mess. The next 6 months weren't easy. Victoria Langley hired expensive lawyers who tried every trick to overturn our claims, but the evidence was too strong. Eventually, she accepted a plea deal on the financial fraud charges. Today, 1 year later, I'm sitting on my grandfather's porch, watching kids ride bikes past houses with doors painted every color of the rainbow. The community garden, where Sarah's tomatoes grow tall, is buzzing with neighbors sharing gardening tips. Behind me, Grandpa's farmhouse has been transformed into our community center, hosting classes, meetings, and celebrations daily. The wetlands are now protected by a conservation easement, with walking trails and educational signs explaining the importance of each plant and animal. Mrs. Caldwell joins me on the porch, handing me a glass of lemonade. Your grandfather would be bursting with pride, she says, pointing to where construction has finally resumed on the redesigned development. Smaller homes, more green space, solar panels on every roof. I found something while cleaning out his study, I tell her, pulling out a faded notebook. Grandpa's journal from 30 years ago. He fought the original developers back then too, when they first tried to build on the wetlands. Mrs. Caldwell smiles. He always said you were just like him, stubborn as a mule when fighting for what's right. In the distance, a blue heron rises from the protected marsh, soaring above homes where people now live in harmony with the land. Sometimes, the best trap isn't about catching someone doing wrong. It's about showing them a better way to do right. Victoria and her HOA tried to steal my land, but instead, they gave me something far more valuable.